Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are coming at you with two new releases from artists that people probably care about, actually, this time. We are going to be talking about two new releases. We're going to be talking about the new album, the follow-up album from the anticipated, I guess, is it a sophomore effort if she had something before?
This is absolutely a sophomore album,
okay,
I would say.
The sophomore album, Happier Than Ever, by Billie Eilish. Pop sensation, Miss Billie Eilish. That joke is a joke. We're also going to be talking about producer extraordinaire Jack Antonoff's album under the name of Bleachers, talking about Take the Sadness Out of Saturday Night. We're going to be talking about that too.
Hang on a minute.
Oh?
Jake, did you get the names right on every single album listed thus far?
Yeah, and yep.
Whoa. By Mr. Bungle, we're talking about California, was that the last album from Mr. Bungle?
Yes, the last sort of studio album of original material. They put out.
We covered we covevered the first
last year,
Mr. Bungle album way in the past. Go check
December,
that out.
actually.
It will. Oh, wow, was it really that long ago?
Remember?
Damn. Go check that out if you haven't seen them, sure. It'll inform our discussion today. And also, we are, of course, continuing our Radiohead retrospective this week. We're going to be talking about the King of Limbs. So that's going to be interesting. Stay tuned for that. Also, we released our latest episode, our final episode in our Doki Doki Literature Club Let's Play today. Just Monica. Just Monica. And also, in the way of peripheral podcast news, my books are fucking done. Children of the Grave, volumes 1 through 9 are complete. You can buy all of those. You can read all of those for free. But also, I have the omnibus out. There is volumes 1 through 5 and
buy them,
6
or I will
through 9.
End you.
And Morgan will kill you if you don't. So now I'm sorry. It's that you have to do it.
I was gonna
buy them. Though.
I was gonna buy them, but now that Morgan said that, I don't think I will anymore.
Oh, well, that's a shame. They are far more reasonably priced if you don't want to buy the volumes individually. And if you don't want to buy them at all, you can go read them from Fiction Press. All of the links are going to be down below. But it is complete. The entire thick boy. I fucking did it.
Get 2 tabs open here. Ticket to New Zealand.
Yeah, boy.
Open the next one.
He's got a ticket to ride.
Where to get gun in New Zealand.
Before we get into what we've been listening to, I want to take a moment to shout out a couple of things. First of all, friend of the podcast, Connor, has just released a new EP under his project, Calendar's Commas. It's a sort of ambient project. If you're into that sort of thing, then you'll enjoy this EP. It's very good.
We will link that as well.
We'll put that link in the description as well. And I also want to just take a moment to shout out, because we've been getting more and more comments on our videos lately, which as we've said before is, we love to read comments. We love when we get them. We always kind of gather around and read them. So I thought that it might be cool to just do, so long as we keep getting them, to have a regular thing where we just kind of shout out some of the comments that we've been getting. Obviously, we do our best to reply to them, but sometimes we can't reply to all of them. Plus, I think it's more personal to shout out commenters on the video call. So just a couple of people I want to shout out. We have been getting more comments recently from friend of the podcast viewer, Brett Faringer, who has been leaving lovely comments. And so I wanted to shout out Brett, a valued viewer who we are incredibly grateful to have interacting with us. Dramendus and Sackett, as usual, they've been prolific commenters. JD as well has been commenting on our Reddit posts too, which we really appreciate.
Brett Farengar, the court wizard in Skyrim.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and I think Sackett as well left a comment on our last week's episode saying that August and I need to do a video on Nicholas Jar. And so I just wanted Sackett to know that we did discuss this, and we are certainly going to maybe have something in the pipeline for a little later down the track. So the Dark Side review will not be the last Nick Jar content you get on this channel. I think that's fairly confidently safe to say anyway. So yeah,
it's a pinky promise.
Shout out to Saket and Brett and Dremenders and everyone. If you're a viewer and you haven't left a comment, or you don't comment all that often, but you enjoy what we do, or you have thoughts about what we do, then please, it's never too late to start leaving comments. We love to read them, and we love to shout them out in our videos as well. And if you leave comments on reviews with your own thoughts on the albums that we review as well, we'd be more than happy to shout those out in our subsequent videos too. I think that's something we originally wanted to hopefully do when we started this, but didn't quite have the audience then, and now we do. So yeah, let us know. We love hearing your thoughts, not only on what we do and what we should review, but also on the albums we review and what you actually think about them. So yeah, keep them coming. Good stuff. All right, let's move into our, as usual, what we've been listening to over the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I've actually undergone quite an interesting journey these past couple of days with music. One thing I did is I listened to the, I guess, discography of one internet legend, Neil Cicierega. I listened to every mashup album he's ever made. Fun story for those who don't know, but when he released his most recent project, Mouth Dreams, every member of this podcast linked up on a Zoom call, and we listened to the entirety of that album. And it is a very fondly held memory that I have experiencing that madness with all of you. And I meant to get around to listening to all this because, of course, I've been exposed to songs like The Immaculate Bustin'. So I decided I had to get to the rest of them. Some of my favorites, by the way, if you are even vaguely interested in internet oddities like this, or just are interested in the way you can remix or mash up certain songs, please listen to all of these. They are all well worth your time, and I think that all of them are of similar quality and entertainment value. Neil is a very, very, very smart person who really knows his way around music clearly, but some of my favorites were Crocodile Chop, which is a mashup of Elton John's Crocodile Rock and Chop Suey by System of a Down, which I've listened to that song far more times than I care to admit. That one's probably my favorite up there with stuff like Bustin'. There was one mashup, I think, that happened with a Kate Bush song, and I can't remember which one.
It's Kate Bush's Cloud Busting and Katy Perry's California Girls.
Yeah, that one is absolutely fantastic.
That's one of my favorites too.
And just, I won't even spoil like a bunch of the other ones, just because there's such a that's half the journey with them, is just kind of discovering what he manages to mash together. I would say that all of those are just fantastic fucking times. Go listen to those. I'm pretty sure you can download them for free on his website or acquire them easily. I don't think they're on streaming, but you can find them on YouTube if nothing else.
Absolutely.
I listened to also I finally gave a listen to my second album by The Strokes. I listened to The New Abnormal finally, because I'm bad for some reason. Had fucking Morgan and August and a bunch of people just being like, hey, this album's great last year. And I'm like, cool, why don't I not listen to it for a year? And then I decided to listen to it. And honestly, I think I like it a little bit better than Room on Fire. I'm not sure how hot that take is, considering how well that album was received last year, but god damn, it was really fucking good. I don't think that album really has a weak point on it, frankly. I just, oh, God bless the every guitar tone on that album. It's just distorted to all hell. It's like, oh, that's good. Drums, please, Fab.
Relevant as well, because Is This It just turned 20 this week, celebrating its 20th anniversary. A lot of think pieces I read on that record. Really enjoyed revisiting it as well. And I want to say, I know it's not the popular opinion in this podcast, but I revisited it, and I have to say, and be a basic bitch and say that one is still my favorite Strokes album. It really holds up, I think, to this day.
I'm sure you and most
20
people.
years old, I feel my intestines turning to dust. It's cool.
Yeah, that's going to get more and more common over the next 5 years, that feeling. But yeah, still my favorite Strokes album, and Hard to Explain is still my favorite Strokes song.
That's the one I will get to next. I will say I will totally shout out Ode to the Mets, which is a song that we shouted out last year. I did listen to that song just because I made it a point to listen to all the songs that we put in our best of 2020 list. But that song It's at least top 3 on that album for sure. I pretty much loved every second of that album. It's an album that basically it's the sound of the summer. It's an album that just really makes me think of being a teenager and it being summertime, which is not as backhanded as that might sound for someone who did not enjoy their teen years, but it's a good vibe. I like it very much.
Yeah, I suspect that'll be an album, the new abnormal anyway, that ages really well in the Strokes discography as well. It just has that feeling. Also wanted to shout out, because it's just, I think, come out today. Touche Amore did a cover of Hard to Explain for the 20th anniversary of Is This It? And it is everything. It's everything you would hope that a Touche Amore cover of a Strokes song would be.
Excuse me while I download that.
Wow.
So yeah, check that out.
Is literally on my birthday in 5 years that the debut Arctic Monkeys record turns 20.
Oh wow!
And I will just completely fucking die that day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's good. Aside from that, I listened to. I think the reason that I listened to this specific array of music is because of Mike the Snare. Because this is the only point of similarity I can think of between all of these. But shout out to Mike the Snare. I love you, music father. I listened to 2 albums.
He's probably
by
younger
National.
than you, Jake.
He's like a year older than me. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm fairly certain. But father. Shout out to the Old Boy remake. Anybody?
Hell yeah.
I knew it. Yeah. I thought you
anywho,
the IT crowd.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah, that's as you probably should. I listened to 2 albums by The National this week. I listened to my favorite National album, Trouble Will Find Me, and album that I just like. God, I really just like this album so much more every time I hear it, to the point where I'm not convinced that in a year from now it will be my favorite, and that's Sleep Well Beast. Like, man, from the second those pianos happen on that opener, I am just into that fucking album. Just the boom, 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 boom.
Hey, baby.
Oh God, it's so fucking good. Oh God, that album is written so fucking well. There are like 2 songs on that album that don't like, that I'm not just like over the fucking moon and into the galaxy for, like I am for the rest of the album. But I could see it changing. But like, you know, you got shit like Corinne at the Liquor Store on that album, and it's just like it's a really good album. You don't need me to tell you that. And also, so is Trouble Will Find Me. But I gotta shout out the fact that album is such a phenomenal fucking grower. I also listened to, again, the Mike the Snare connection comes back. He released his video on Pink Floyd's discography. So I watched that. And Pink Floyd, one of my favorite bands, made many of my favorite albums. I haven't listened to them a lot recently for, I guess, I mean, it's just like, you know, podcast. Last thing you're going to do is listen to fucking prog rock from the 60s and 70s if you don't have the time to, I guess. But I listened to Dark Side of the Moon. I listened to Wish You Were Here. I listened to The Wall. I listened to Animals. And I listened to Metal. The 5 best Pink Floyd albums, IMO, and I'm pretty much everyone else's opinion. I don't really think that's a hot take. But yeah, I love all of those albums as much as I always did. I could say a heaps about each of them, but I won't. But I mean, you know, it's Pink Floyd. I will say it bothers me immensely that in their sort of golden run of albums, the lowest rated album in that lot is The Wall, which is my favorite, which has a 3.8 on Rate Your Music, and everything else has a 3.9 or above a 4. And I'm gonna beat some ass about it.
It's definitely an important and very good album.
I blame Tyler individually.
Yeah, please do. I will say though, to me, it's not that surprising that it's low rating, just because it's a and I mean this in a positive way, but it's the self-indulgent, like big bombastic 90-minute thing. And I'm glad they made it, but it's also like it kind of canoned their career.
That's really more like just kind of Roger Waters in general, dude. Just kind of like The Wall already happened at a tumultuous time in that band's trajectory, and then like Final Cut was just like maybe the most aptly named album of all time, which is like a fine album and all, but that album was just like, whoosh, and then the band was just like, maybe we shouldn't make music together anymore. And then they made Momentary Lapse of Reason. And it's just like, cool. I love listening to David Gilmour go.
I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made. I think Mike the Snare even probably suggested this, is that every Pink Floyd album after The Wall is not a Pink Floyd album.
Oh, I mean, he actually made the point with that in spirit, The Wall is a Roger Waters solo album, which
that's actually a good
completely
point
agree with, frankly. Yeah. I mean, it's just so autobiographical and so blanketly about him. And I mean, he even owns the rights to it now. So obviously, I will shout out, I didn't listen to like all of it, but it's, if you're a Pink Floyd fan, it's like necessary. Roger Waters actually came out with an album in 2017 that I really, really, really enjoyed. I believe it was called Is This the Life We Really Want? If you like that era of Floyd, if you like Animals, if you like The Wall, go for it. I mean, it's basically Animals, but for the 2010s. Instead of, being angry at policies from the 70s, he's angry at policies from the 2010s.
And the credit I'll give that record is that I don't hate it, and which is a miracle considering it's a miracle considering what you just said. Roger Waters at that age making a political record about the 2010s.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a miracle it doesn't suck.
It's a really well-written album. It prioritizes, like, it's not the hymn, like, rambling, because like I don't know if you all have done some like looks into Roger Waters and some of the stuff that he like conceptualized for his solo career and albums, but it is fucking absurd. That man is insane. Like legitimately, he probably did so much psychedelics that something is fundamentally fucked, because some of the concept albums he's made are just like, dude, why in the goddamn hell would anyone listen to this? I say that as someone who like The Wall was my favorite album ever.
Like
this is a real post with a capital P that I'm about to say. But the comp that I've always made is that like Kanye West has always been to me like the rap world Roger Waters. And to me,
oh God, you're not wrong though. You're not wrong.
And I hate it. I hate it.
Well, this is the thing. I find Kanye West unbearable. I find Roger Waters unbearable. And yet I'm totally there for when they completely fucking implode, because it results in a total mess that's always really interesting to listen to.
Donda review incoming.
I mean, if Donda comes out, it seems like it does exist, but
the pre-order is available.
Yeah, I'm so I'm so excited. I'm not.
It's going to be an interesting week for sure.
The thing
it's going to come out The Wall sometime, maybe.
Yeah. The thing about The Wall Hanging Racing though is like it is my favorite Pink Floyd record. However, I can completely see how if you're not on its wavelength, almost everything about it can turn you off really easily.
Saoirse, you make a great point. When I was listening to it last night, I kind of had that point because I was bitter when I saw that rating, and I just sort of went back and listened to it, and I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with people? And I'm just like, listening to this is like, it really does have like a solid 8 of the best songs that one of the best rock bands of all time ever put out. Yeah. And everything surrounding those 8 songs simply does not work with the rest of the album there to support it. Like, it just doesn't, frankly. I don't know how that was the first Pink Floyd album I listened to and loved, and like that's the one I latched onto the strongest, but it is still my favorite just purely by I think I fucking tweeted about this on like my private, and I said fucking like it's basically like ground zero for my fascination with broad, conceptual, narrative, messy albums that are like, you just have to fully immerse yourself in and parse through.
And your favorite band is Porcupine Tree?
I think what always fucked me up is that my dad showed me the movie around the same time as I first heard the album in full. And ever since then, like listening to the album has never felt like complete. I've always wanted to watch the movie because I think it's
the
weird.
Movie's
like
the full experience.
It's weird. Like The Wall's probably like my 5th favorite Pink Floyd record. And yet the Pink Floyd, The Wall, the film, is my favorite piece of Pink Floyd related media.
Oh, yes. 100%. I have a fucking, there's a guy who makes some fucking restorations of old Hong Kong movies that my friend showed me, who also got a hold of a 35mm print of The Wall and is selling them on Blu-ray. And I am waiting every day to get my notice that's going to be in the mail, because I just fucking release it on Blu-ray Criterion. You fucking cowards.
That's great, but like my point was less about sort of like the structure, but like if you get the idea in your head early on that it's like kind of like an adolescent view of the world, it's a very sort of male angry album, or it's like, you know, a point everyone's made about it, like we live in a society. If you get that in your head early on, then it would just seem like the feature length sort of male screed, you know.
I mean, that's certainly not like an issue for me. I know
it's not clear for you, but I think that for a lot of people that is the stumbling block with it.
Oh, that's just a purposefully lame two-dimensional reading of it. You're just not actually giving it attention. So, I mean, that's in my opinion a stupid opinion, because it doesn't actually engage with the full text.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm just trying to explain maybe why it has the rating
I've
it has,
absolutely seen the take of, it's just like, you know, even if you can get past Waters' inherent kind of self-obsession and like narcissism, it's obviously a very youthful, I mean, like, but you have songs on there that's just like, guys, I know he's an egotist and that's what makes him good, but also he knew the words he was writing, and like 98% of them are 100% self-critical. So take a step back for a moment.
I think you're both on the money, and Saoirse, I think you're on the money in terms of the general feeling that pervades people who don't engage with the record, and perhaps what that contributes to the rating. I will add one more thing on the notion of the Pink Floyd solo album thing. I definitely see The Wall as a Pink Floyd record. I don't see it as a Roger Waters solo record, and to me, that's like calling Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness a Billy Corgan solo record.
That's why I said thematically, because musically that album is nothing without David Gilmour. Absolutely
that's so true.
Nothing.
That's absolutely true. And that's I think the distinction in terms of how people approach. I mean, the Wall is an album that begs you to approach it in terms of those thematic and what Roger Waters is doing, and to a certain extent where it can be easy to overlook the musicality of that album, right? And what's so beautiful and dynamic about the way that album sounds. And so that's a conversation that often gets forgotten, and I think maybe contributes to a certain extent to people saying, oh, well, you know, this is Roger Waters' album. And like, you know, lyrically, it's very much him, autobiographical, all that sort of stuff, but you're really downplaying as well what else is going on in that record besides the lyricism. Even though that is obviously the big thing, there's still a lot else happening on that record that wouldn't exist without the other members of Pink Floyd who are in the band at that point. So last
thing I will mention is that I'll do a two-part thing that'll, I'm sure, segue perfectly into August, in that I have been re-listening to Glacier Flower 21 a lot again recently, and I don't really know like if there's like a reason for that. I just kind of like put it on and was just kind of like, okay. So, you know, congratulations, August. You make good music, if I didn't already make that apparent in my review. But I also listened to Dream Theater's Metropolis Part 2, an album I like. Yeah, an album I like.
Well, on that note, I'll be talking about for my first thing I've listened to this week, my favorite album. Kind of first listen this whole year, head over shoulders, that being Dream Theater's Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. This album is awesome. I love the August 10. I love the concept. The story is so fun and interesting. It kind of reads as like a 70s kind of giallo murder mystery story.
Yeah.
With that rating, it becomes just
Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me was what I got.
Twin Peaks
actually.
Also. Yeah, that's another good comparison there. The metal, the like progressive elements are just so heavy. I think James LaBrie is an amazing vocalist who really makes this band, and Mike Portnoy's drumming, beyond exceptional. Every player on here is going so hard.
Greatest guitar player alive. Send tweet.
I mean,
there's really not a lot of people who would rival that, frankly.
Can I disagree? I don't know. But yeah,
this be like Tom Morello.
Excuse me.
Tom Morello's a fucking
They're
great
all
player.
queens.
Yeah, hang on a minute. I'm just saying. I mean, Tom Morello is like the queen of, fucking England, and John Petrucci is like the queen of God.
But yeah, it was just fucking everything I wanted out of an album, and then it gave me even more to that, namely in overcoming one of my biggest pet peeves with music in general, using like news clip samples like just randomly to fill up space and have noise. And this uses it with a purpose, and there's like a narrative reason they're there and a symbolic and thematic purpose of what's being played. And it was awesome. Yeah, this album kicks ass. It's a 10. Listen to it if you haven't. You may not love it because it's Dream Theater and everyone on the internet except like this podcast and a couple others seem to hate them. So
I keep meaning to listen to this, and I haven't yet. I definitely will before the next time we record, I suspect. But I'm kind of almost like dreading / anticipating finding out where I fall, because it seems to be like I have mixed feelings on the Dream Theater records I have heard. I think Images and Words is amazing. I think Awake is bloated,
you and I
but
are
really
kind of
good.
on the same place.
And I think Falling Into Infinity is weirdly overhated. So I'm in this weird position where I have these mixed feelings, and
Tyler, you're gonna like it.
I have a feeling that he will too. There's something about that album in particular that just kind of has an X factor for a lot of people. And as somebody who's generally a whole lot lighter on Dream Theater than like most prog rock or even like say Morgan or August are, like, yeah, there's a lot of things about Dream Theater that kind of invite that sort of inherent uncoolness or whatever, but it's just like, I feel like hating them is just like a waste of fucking time. Like, just listen to something else then, man. I don't know. They do their thing really well. They have a good.
They've got a new album coming out too. That later.
They do.
Awful album art.
It's like
a sign.
It's awful, but it's in the most Dream Theater way possible.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I 100% approve of it because it makes me smile so hard every time I look at it.
I love it. I love how Hugh Syme has gone from making these gorgeous paintings and like photograph collages like on the Rush albums to just stock image websites.
Yeah.
This is his career progression.
Yeah.
Keeping up with progressive concept albums over the runtime of 75 minutes. I also listened to from the band Vektor, Terminal Redux.
Ooh.
This album is a pretty fun mix of like crossover thrash and technical thrash metal. It's really invigorating, really fun concept at the center of it. And there's some moments where they kind of stray away from that really technical stuff and have some more lighter, breezier moments, which really, I think, make the album what it is. And then it closes on this fucking epic 13-minute closer. Almost the void. 14 minutes. Yeah. More of a classic record now. Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys. This album is so much better. So much better than their first one.
Oh, yeah. It's like night and day. That glow up is insane.
It makes I had that album at like a 7 and I bumped it down to a 6 just because this is
a 6 out of 10 album. It is.
It is so much fucking better.
But that's down to the fucking Dust Brothers. Their production on Paul's Boutique is some of the best hip hop production of all time.
It sounds good
Paul
today.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Hasn't aged.
Yeah, and this album is also just has a ludicrously amazing sense of humor. Like, just listen to the track Eggman if you want an impression of that.
Hey, ladies!
And High Plains Drifter, Sounds of Silence, Shake Your Rump. Fuck, this album is so good. Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun. Shit, that song rules.
The heaviest fucking, and then 3 Minute Rule. which has perhaps the funniest metaphor ever, where it's I think it's like a pig in a pen, like a dog on a leash, comparing two of the exact same metaphor to itself.
Oh,
and
look,
that just leaves me rolling.
And then fucking B-boy booyabays.
The 12-minute closer of like 9 disparate ideas that somehow manages to work.
It's like what the Abbey Road medley should be.
Spitting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention that again when we get to the albums I'm listening to, but we'll get to that.
Well, final thing from this year, I've been fairly positive so far. Now that's going to take a negative turn because I believe I've heard. I believe I've heard the worst album of the year. Not Bo Burnham. It's something that has managed to be infinitesimally more whiny, preachy, pretentious, and amusical. Hobo Johnson's The Revenge of Hobo Johnson.
Oh no!
This is the worst shit. This is the most
doing stuff.
He is still doing stuff. This is the longest 32 minutes of my life. This was the most. This was the most joyless, unmusically interesting, stiff, stilted, and back-asswards political album I've ever heard. Any gesture at a political idea falls flat when later he's like, why care about anything? And it's like, well, why are you making this album if you don't care about anything? Shut the fuck up.
You know what?
Teenage solipsism ass.
All of his music is like that, and I will forever resent Anthony Fantano for trying to convince the internet that Hobo Johnson has made anything good. He
gave that one an 8, didn't he?
It sucks ass. It's fucking awful. So bad. Everything this dude has made is just fucking cringe.
From before he was a sex pest.
Anyway, this was complete and utter unlistenable shit. I don't even recommend listening to it as like a meme of, I want to hear the worst out. No, don't. Do not. 0 out of 10. Morgan, have you been listening to anything interesting?
Nope.
Fuck.
August is like my plan's fucking ruined.
Moving on.
Saoirse.
Okay.
You better be.
I have had a kind of fucking mad week of listening to records. So I'll touch on first. I took a re-listen to one of my favorite records from my teenage years, that being Positive Songs for Negative People by one Mr. Frank Turner. His most explicitly rock-centric record. But because they've been leaning more into like the folk side of himself in the past few albums, it ends up being his closest like an actual typical like folk punk sound out of all of them. And it fucking rules. The title is very appropriate, and yeah, it came to me at a very, very sort of dark time in my life. And going back to it, I just yeah.
Fucking
going
song for Josh just fucking
Jesus wept.
No.
If you want a live recorded folk song about a friend committing suicide, that's the one.
It has Get Better on it, which is the boppiest fucking bop of all time.
Get Better is the first song you put on your car radio when I went to visit you.
Yes, it is. And it's for a reason. That song is. It's like, oh god, I wish I could say it's the best Frank Turner song, but it's not quite. Not quite fucking.
You know
Long
I
Live the Queen or the
you
fucking.
better.
Oh, fucking hell!
How dare you? Shawn Mendes.
Sorry, I've been watching too much Tom the Shadows, and as soon as you said "Get Better," I just immediately had "Treat You Better" in my head.
Wow,
there's something wrong with you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. These are the last times.
I feel like there's a certain section of music Twitter where if they were aware this album existed, it would be like the most popular album in that section.
You know, yeah, you got a point there.
Yeah, I feel that way
because it is like
Love Iron Song, which I think is one of the best singer-songwriter records I've ever heard. And yet seems to be like only appreciated or only enjoyed by this kind of niche of people, which is so strange to me.
The appeal is so broad. It doesn't make any sense.
I feel like Love Iron Song is like an overall much better album, but I still love Positive Songs with all of my heart, because like every song is about, hey, life is shit, but that's okay, right?
The Angel Island.
Would you say that you love it with all of your tape deck heart?
Yes, I listen to that too, but I'm not going to talk about it so much.
I'm gonna tape your dick to your forehead.
Speaking of long concept records, I listened to Pure Comedy by Father John Misty, which is an album that has a score that's too low on Rate Your Music.
Basically, everything that we said about The Wall is applicable to Pure Comedy.
Yeah.
Like everything.
Yes. Yes.
I still love that.
Once
record,
again,
though.
I kind of hate that you're not wrong.
Look, I don't care how long Leaving LA is. I love that song.
It's a great album.
It's amazing. It's like you hide it's like you hide Elton John to make an album about life, death, and everything, you know?
Yeah.
And it's
but what's so potent about it is Father John Misty's personality, which is not really like any other singer-songwriters, and it's more powerful because of, he's younger and he's at this particular point in his life where he's kind of starting to become older, like, and in terms of like going from being a fresh-faced artist to an older artist. And it's a great record because the subtext is the passage of time in his life, and the text is the way that the world is changing, and it's a really powerful record. I'm waiting for the next one. He hasn't put out a record in 3 years, which I guess is not that long, but it feels like
he's allowed to have a break after he wrote Ballad of the Dying Man and had to live through an entire year of quarantine with that song under his belt.
Well, God Save It Customer is like an even more depressing album, because that's his post-divorce record. And that's the record that he made after, the lowest point in his life, which was the point that happened right after he released Pure Comedy. So these are records that are centered around like really just difficult emotions. And there is some backstory to the next segment, I guess, because there's kind of one artist that I want to talk about.
Saoirse Lore, incoming.
Well, it's not really Saoirse Lore, I guess, but I've been listening to a podcast a lot called Perfect Sounds, which is run by a British comedian called James Acaster. And every episode he opens it with, in 2017, I had a breakdown. And as a consequence, I listened to as much music from 2016 as I possibly could.
Good year for that.
I've heard about this. It's called Perfect Sound Whatever, I think, which is meaningful because that's the name of the closing track on Jeff Rosenstock's Worry.
Well, exactly. Well, that's the name of the book that I bought is Perfect Sounds Whatever.
That's what I was thinking of. I didn't know there was a podcast.
Yeah, well, the podcasts are called Perfect Sounds. And anyway, I listened to Worry by one Mr. Jeff Rosenstock.
Great record.
Which has been one of my favorite records for a very long time. I remember when I first heard Pash Rash on one of the Spotify suggested playlists, and well, that was the first Jeff Rosenstock song I showed you. Was Pash Rash, and it's just, if you want, it's like Cliche Guevara by Against Me. It's like, if you want a song that's like the perfect nugget of punk energy, here it is.
To Be a Ghost is maybe the most poignant song of the 2010s.
Yeah.
It's also just a fucking rager.
It's such a banger, man. But on that episode they did on Worry, they said that I'm tying it into Beatles here. They said the last half of it is like the medley on Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Or it's like trying out a different genre of punk with every song.
There's a bag at the door. There was a bag at the door.
But I also
we don't want to live inside a hole. Oh, that's God. A great fucking medley.
But it's like the first half, it's like the best opening run of any rock album I've ever heard. Then the back half is that medley. And it's amazing. I also listened to Bomb the Music Industry, his band. I listened to the album Vacation, which also bangs, and I want to make a note of that. Great. This will be segment 4 out of 5. I listened to an album Zach, friend of the podcast, has been nagging me to listen to, which is by Territorios, by a band called Tenu, who are, I think, a South American crust-punk screamo band. And this is their second record, but as opposed to the first one, which is a bunch of songs, this is one long musical piece that's 27 minutes long. It's very angry. It is also very like desperate feeling. There's a lot of sort of black gaze influence on it. And it on their Bandcamp page, they say this came out of living through COVID in an oppressive regime. And it's an album about that. And you feel it listening to the music. It's just such like a scream of anger and pain. And Zach was right to recommend it. But I got Sparks pilled this week.
Oh, yeah.
To cap off the day. I listened to 4 different Sparks records. I want to say that Number One in Heaven was my favorite of the 4.
Yeah, me too. Well, actually, no, it's my second favorite, but it's like, it's so hard to pick a favorite.
Right.
Georgie Mordor.
Right back.
I have ordered Propaganda on vinyl on Discogs, so that's going to arrive in the next few days. But the weirdest one I listened to was an album called The Seduction of Ingmar Bergman, which is an hour-long radio musical about, after making Smiles of a Summer Night, I think, he goes to America to make his American film because they're offering money, and goes mad and tries to escape the set and is chased by a helicopter, and then goes to see a movie with Greta Garbo, and then the album ends.
Yeah. Did you see the documentary, the Edgar Wright documentary yet, Saoirse?
I have not, no.
I watched that the other day. I was
going to see it on Tuesday. But yeah.
I watched that the other day, and it's a great documentary, incidentally, especially if you're into Sparks. But even if you're not, like, it's definitely a documentary that's made to introduce you to Sparks if you're not familiar. But they go through every single Sparks album in that documentary, and just hearing them talk about The Seduction of Ingmar Bergman was like, holy shit, this is fucking wild. But yeah, that's a reaction I've had to basically every Sparks.
Anyway, Annette out August 20th.
Yes.
Leo Carricks.
Yeah. There's a great undercurrent narrative in the documentary where they write a bunch of screenplays over the decades, and they start. One was originally Tim Burton signed on to direct it in the 90s, and this was at a point where their career was fucking flagging, and so they were desperately holding on to this, and then he eventually quit the project and it fell apart, and it was like the worst thing ever.
Our career is dying. Let's latch on to Tim Burton.
We're talking peak Tim Burton here in the mid 90s.
Fair enough. Still funny though.
But yeah, so basically that not happening meant they had to completely reinvent themselves again, and it ended up with one of their best sort of comeback eras. But anyway, the Annette thing happening was like a big thing for them finally, because over decades they've tried to get a movie made, and it's never worked out. And then all of a sudden, fucking Leos Carax, of all fucking people, says, "This shit rules. I'm making this." Which is such a cool
I think they hooked up because there's a Sparks song in Holy Motors.
Oh, is there?
I've done some reading about this.
I'll have to revisit that. The documentary makes a pretty good case for the track This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Two of Us off of Came Into My House as one of the most, and I have to agree with the sentiment, one of the most wild pop songs of all time, considering its context. If you listen to that song, it's just stupid. And it is their best song, in my opinion.
Yeah, my dad played it to me obsessively when I was a kid, which is how I know Sparks in the first place.
And it's like they blew up because they went on Top of the Pops and played that song, and Ron had his like famous Hitler mustache, and he was just sitting there with his Hitler mustache, and people were like, what the fuck is this band?
And still nobody really knows.
Yeah. Anyway.
But if you have any curiosity at all, listen to The Seduction of Ingmar Bergman, because it is insane. Just as an aside, one of my Twitter mutuals has released an EP this week, not the Calendar Commerce thing, but an EP called Jazz Baby 2020 by Body Double. It's like a power pop punk EP. It's great. I recommend it.
Beautiful. Okay, so what have I been listening to over the last week? One of my favorite albums of all time is an album called Gentleman by the Afghan Wigs, which are kind of like not, I won't say forgotten, but they're not talked about as much in terms of they're not a grunge band, but they're definitely like an aesthetic soaked in the grunge era, but mixed with kind of like a more moody, soulful aesthetic to that sound. And they're an amazing band. And in their peak, they made amazing records. And Gentleman is a 10 album, in my opinion, a completely incredible emotional record. And so, but I've never listened to the follow-up to that album, which is called Black Love, which is generally regarded as even better than that album by most people who love the Afghan Wigs. And so I finally listened to it this week. And well, Gentleman is this record that's on such a pedestal for me that I don't think anything could overtake it. But Black Love is astounding. Again, incredibly emotional. If you are attracted to albums with that kind of dark, grungier guitar aesthetic that deal with themes of being like really dark masculine themes of really just the worst kind, being the worst kind of person and kind of being in these mutually destructive and toxic relationships. Is really kind of dark, painful subject matter in these songs, but the band is so soulful and so emotionally powerful that it is a really good musical and aesthetic fit for Greg Dully, who is the frontman's lyrical interests. So yeah, if you like really kind of emotionally wrought, painful music from that 90s era, then the Afghan Wigs are utterly essential. One of some of the darkest music, I think. I would even say they're not really the same, and they're more kind of reserved and less like showy in terms of their performances. But I would compare the vibe very much to Alice in Chains. So if you enjoy the vibe of Alice in Chains records, you'll enjoy the Afghan Wigs. It's very much that kind of tortured, soulful, grunge era stuff. And Black Love, either Black Love or Gentleman, you can flip a coin on those two records as to which to listen to. They're both great in their own ways. But Black Love really blew my mind this week, and I've been listening to it a lot. It's a very powerful album. Also, I listened to finally Leviathan from Mastodon, a record I've been meaning to listen to for a while. Obviously, their Moby Dick concept album. It is heavy as hell. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I found it to be just as dynamic as Remission, but more engrossing in terms of the storytelling, which I think really elevated it. And again, the intensity of this record is unmatched. And Hearts Alive, especially that kind of massive 13-minute track in the back half, really kind of captivated me. It's a very immaculately constructed record, and obviously it gets a big fat tick from me. I look forward to continuing my Mastodon listening. I'll be listening to Blood Mountain and then Crack the Sky soon as well. But yeah, that album was everything I hoped it would be. I also want to shout out, I listened to the new collaborative record between Laura Marling and Mike Lindsay at their project Lump, which I think we briefly alluded to in our Laura Marling B-Sides episode. We didn't really discuss. They released a second record together called Animal last week, which was quite good. I really enjoyed it. It didn't quite blow my mind in the way that I think Laura's best songs and songwriting do, but the mix of what she does and her vocal melodies and her unique skills and the very sort of very different aesthetic of Mike Lindsay as a producer to the sort of things you normally hear on a Laura Marling record made for a sharp sound that I thought was quite enjoyable. So I definitely recommend that if you're a fan of Laura Marling or if that sort of thing appeals to you. It was a really good album. I also want to shout out, I spent a lot of time this week listening to the music of Voxing, which I'm not going to talk about because they put out a new album the other day and we'll be reviewing it next week. So put a pin in that, motherfucker.
Just be sad and gay.
Oh, I mean, yes. I also listened to a record I've been waiting a long time to listen to. I just haven't listened to it until now, and I have no reason for that. But it's The Great Misdirect by Between the Buried and Me, which is my favorite Between the Buried and Me album so far that I've heard. Surprising probably no one, I guess. It's just It very much builds on the, I guess, sound and qualities and characters of Colors, except it's a more, I would say, refined and singularly focused album. It still has a lot of character though. It's just some of the more, I guess, zanier elements of Colors are really like kind of toned back on Great Misdirect, which is like, I'm definitely hope that to see them return in subsequent records as well to some extent, and I'm sure they will. But the Great Misdirect's more, I guess, dramatic and moody and intense sound really captivated me. It was a very cinematic album, which I loved. I found it really enthralling. A stellar, superb record. Definitely the best thing I've heard from this band as yet. I will be listening to their 2010s records as well before we eventually get to the upcoming Colors 2, which we're all eagerly awaiting the release of. So yeah, that's basically all I have to shout out this week. Now it's time to get into our reviews for the week. And first up is... So Billie Eilish needs no introduction. Everyone on the planet who knows or gives a shit about music knows who Billie Eilish is. And Billie Eilish has had a remarkably tumultuous few years. I mean, the release of her first album, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, I guess is one of the most sort of landmark pop releases of recent times in terms of cultural impact. That thing landed like an atomic bomb when it came out in terms of cultural impact. And there was a sense of inevitability with it as well. Like, she was being hyped up and built up, and her fan base and her cultural prominence were growing steadily in the lead up to that record, such that when it came out, it very much felt like one of the, most culturally significant debut albums in popular music, of the last decade. I think that's pretty fair to say. And then obviously the Grammy sweep that happened and it subsequently that sort of, I guess, reaffirmed its cultural status and Billie Eilish's newfound superstardom. And in many ways, I always knew that Billie Eilish's second album would be more interesting than her first. That first album is obviously, as I've said, really culturally important and, really full of personality and distinction. It is characterized by this dark but distinctly adolescent songwriting that oozes bedroom recorded charm, naivety, and teenage emotion. And it was all of those things that connected with kids around the world and made her the star that she is. And all of those things are fine. And Billie Eilish's first album is just that for me, fine. The big songs, Bad Guy, Bury a Friend, When the Party's Over, are a good mix of playful fun and, generally heart-wrenching emotion that you'll all recognize from being a teenager. And they're all distinctly shaped on that album by the lens of Billie and Phineas in their bedroom, channeling that energy of Billie's burgeoning creative drive as a teenager into these skeletal pop songs. But I always knew that their basic template, from which that debut album rarely, if ever, diverges, would never last more than an album. Because how could it? Billie was being forced to grow up faster than most kids can ever imagine. It's a story as old as fame. And I've seen some critiques launched at Happier Than Ever, this new album, for Billie forcing maturity or trying to act adult. And while I think there is a lot to fairly critique this record for, and I certainly have my own critiques, those critiques in particular confuse me. This idea that Billie is trying to act like an adult in a way that feels disingenuous. I don't see that to me when I listen to this. Children in the entertainment industry are forced to grow up all the time. And that means forced to genuinely develop maturity all the time and have that development compressed without their consent by the tidal wave of industry. Billie Eilish is a Grammy-sweeping international figurehead, and figureheads need development. They need change. They need progress if they're to be accepted. No one wants to see 20-year-old Billie Eilish writing songs like Bad Guy. And yet, Billie is in a curious position because, as is fitting for the hypocritical machine of fame, people are mad that Billie Eilish has not written another song like Bad Guy. In fact, Billie Eilish, what she has done instead is deliver a messy, sweeping, and very much in contrast to the debut, emotionally complicated album of songs that outright reject the fun, playful image of a song like Bad Guy or of When We All Fall Asleep generally. Here, Billie is utterly determined to do the exact opposite of what Bad Guy, that incredibly massive song, did, to show that she is a multifaceted, emotionally complex adult who is dealing with shit related to existing in that state that has been layered upon her and compressed and magnified by her sudden fame. A woman who's trying to be happy, who's trying to be satisfied, who's trying to be powerful, who's trying to set an example for the young girls and women who follow her, who's trying to be a person, trying to do all of these things, wrestling to balance the external world and its demands on her and her own interior battleground. And this is why I think all this stuff is necessary contextualization before we discuss this album. And I think it's also why Happier Than Ever exists in the state that it does. 16 tracks of music that veer wildly between emotional states and images of Billie. You have on these polar extremes, the seductive temptress of Oxytocin, balanced by the heartbroken, rage-fueled venom of the title track, and all these shades of grey in between that decorate the album. It is unquestionably a mess, because Billie Eilish is a mess. And in a sense, it feels like she has crafted the truest representation of who she currently is by deliberately baffling us with the seemingly reckless abandon of this record. And so I think that is a good place to kind of leap off with discussing this. I'm sure we can all agree this album is messy and long, and I'm sure that our mileages with it will vary, but that aspect of it, I mean, I think we would be doing Billie Eilish a disservice if we were to pretend like it weren't completely intentional. So I'd love to discuss that aspect of it and what you guys think is significant about why this album is the way it is.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting in that it simultaneously feels like such a natural progression of a human being from the previous album, but also in the same way as that album was, like a very purposeful repositioning against certain pre-expected ideas of the reaction to it, right? Mm-hmm. Like if that first album, it's definitely a teenager's record. Like it's an album by someone defining their identity and who they are and honing in on that and growing into themselves as a person. And then this album, Happier Than Ever, is it's an early 20s record. It's an album visibly made by someone in their early 20s, in that it's someone who's taken that identity and suddenly emerged in the world and is kind of running around trying to find out how they fit in it, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, so much of this reflects what the first album did in repositioning itself. Because Billie Eilish's image before that album, like if you listen to her earliest singles, her EPs, they were very piano ballady, very pretty, quite nice. And then that, you know, Bury a Friend, Bad Guy. I remember when I first came across those singles browsing on YouTube and was like, what the fuck is this? Who the fuck sounds like this right now? And these dark, threatening songs that are absolute bops, right? And you'll catch yourself, at like 11 at night, brushing your teeth, like humming these melodies that sound like they're out of like a Tim Burton musical, like it's just, and I love that first record. I own it on vinyl. I think it's great. But in the same way as like, I kind of prefer that to this. I'm really glad this album exists. And I feel like this is a record made by someone who accepts that they're not going to be able to catch the same lightning in a bottle. So they're just going to blossom out in all of these directions and explore who they are. And like, that's a really cool thing, even if I think the album is like deeply flawed.
You know what's interesting is I kind of agree completely with your perspective on how Billie approaches this album, but it's weird because I see this record overall to be much better than the debut, or at least more satisfying and meaningful as a record. But I guess that's coming at distinct perspectives on that aesthetic of the debut. It is a unified aesthetic, but it's kind of, I think to me, a bit of a limited aesthetic. Like it's almost as though it's crafted in this way to really cement this particular image of Billie Eilish as this particular kind of teen star who is subversive and kind of darkening all of these images of what a teen star can be, but it feels kind of a bit limited in terms of the, I guess, interestingness of that image and the way that she's able to color it. I mean, there's great singles on that record, but for me, it doesn't really coalesce beyond that. And I think it's weird because like that record and this record are similarly messy in terms of the way that they're constructed, but I feel like there's a little bit more purpose to the mess here. There's a little bit more meaning to the ways in which the songs diverge from each other, even if it doesn't always 100% of the time pull off that contrast. There's a weird sense, at least I'll stop for now by saying there is a sense of real contrast throughout this record that I think distinguishes it from that album in a way that really fascinates me, at least.
I really like, it's very odd for me because I feel like I simultaneously agree and disagree with both of you.
I love when that
in
happens.
The sense that I'm kind of on Saoirse's side of like, I similarly really, really like Billie Eilish's debut. Not a perfect record or anything, but like that was one of my most listened to albums that year, just because I don't know, I found something refreshing about it, because I think the approach that she and Phineas have is one of minimalistic simplicity that I really, really appreciate. It's like they took the entire like modern pop scene and then boiled all of it down to its rawest essentials and then polished those essentials to a mirror sheen to make that album. It's why the bass is so heavy on both of these albums when it wants to be. It's why these are pop albums that have an exceptional focus on groove, even more so than melody, I think. And I think that really suits the whole like kind of darker vibe that When We Fall Asleep had. And I think When We Fall Asleep, at least right now, is the more focused effort. And and I agree with Tyler in the sense that Happier Than Ever is, a mess, but a mess with purpose. But I think the focus of the first one allows it to be just a little bit like it's briefer, it's more focused, and it's not as like, it just feels like everything is very tightly reined in on that one. And it's really more a matter of preference, I think. But like the only issues I have with Billie's messiness on Happier Than Ever come from a purely structural standpoint. Those structural standpoints being that I like a lot of the way this album is sequenced and put together. It feels like a little bit more of like, there is cohesion in it. It's just lost a bit. There are some moments on this album that specifically in its like final third-ish, I mean, I guess this really just gets to the heart of my bugbear with this record, that I will stop burying the lead. I almost hesitantly love it, but it's because it mainly just dips a tiny itty bitty bit for me with the 1-2 punch of Not My Responsibility and Overheated, which I don't think are bad, but they are distinctly, they are pieces on this album that suit the goals of the album and not necessarily the goals of music in like a more direct sense, which is, mileage made.
I feel slightly about them the way I feel about like the spoken word track on England Keep My Bones, where it's like, I see entirely how this fits into what you're doing. Doesn't mean I want to listen to it.
What I'll say about those two,
what
I'll say about those two is I got specific thoughts on those two, because I think that they are redundant with each other, which is the problem.
That is exactly what I was about to say, is that not only do I think individually the songs are a bit musically just, I don't really find them very compelling, but back to back, it really just kind of really nips a lot of the momentum that the album had, in my opinion, which is broadly like I think the biggest glow up in terms of When We Fall Asleep to this one, at least in my opinion, is in fact the writing. I'm a little frustrated with the fact that people seem to think that, like Tyler said, this whole like approach of like, oh, she's forcing maturity. And my answer to that query is yes. That's why I like it. It's because she is a person who is inherently She's put on a stage and she has to force this out of her. It is her best attempt to actualize herself as a person. She has to be forced into that in the way that all musicians do. That's just how it works. And honestly, I think it's very natural. I think that like if anything, if I have any issues with When We Fall Asleep, it's that the writing, like, it is a good like juvenile teenage girl portrait, but occasionally it veers into being that kind of sort of not melodrama even. There are just sort of moments on it where you can tell that Billie just kind of has stupid teenage girl opinions on some things. And it's like, it's understandable, but it's like, you know, she's got a song about why she thinks, all of these people around her doing Xannies and, you know, she's not, which is like, I get the sentiment expressed in that song, but it's also just something that like, yeah, this is a very young person thing to say. And I don't really identify with this anymore because it's just kind of uncharitable viewpoint. But here she focuses everything way more through the lens of herself and the portrait of herself, which I think is a lot more fascinating. And I think this album starts off really well. I love Getting Older. It's a song that like a lot of songs on here are not very traditionally structured, but nonetheless have a lot of production and the intimacy of Billie's voice, the sort of, you know, the quiet minimalism that's still here. It's distinctly a little bit less dark, but it's simultaneously way more multifaceted. She's musing on things like mortality and talking about, getting older, the way her perception of herself has changed, the way that other people view her and how that bothers her now. She's a little bit less of the whole like, oh, I'm a bad bitch on When We Fall Asleep, and a little bit more, oh, this is, you know, kind of actually getting to me. They're like genuinely harrowing portrayals of stuff on songs like Therefore I Am, or like, I don't know if this is going to be a carried sentiment, but like, while I definitely think it lacks the sort of pop hits, you know, Bury a Friend and Bad Guy, which again, not an innate bad thing, is that there's still songs on here, individual songs that like legitimately blow me away. The title track specifically, I think is one of the best songs I've heard all year. Like that was just, even in the context of the record, which is still building off of that minimalist, you know, kind of palette that she's got. And then that song just comes in and it's enormous. It's fucking huge. And Billie's fucking pissed. And I love it. It's so venomous and charged. It's just like, fucking yes. And she has so many, and the follow-up too, it's like, it's distinctly more like gentle thing, but like the absolute venom on songs like Male Fantasy that are simultaneously really revealing, talking about Billie watching porn and being pissed off that this is all something that's catered to the male gaze and not to what's conducive to her, and talking about her sexuality. And like, you know, it was there on When We Fall Asleep, you know, the desire to be kind of a seductress, but like this is so much more overt. Billie Eilish, like most teenagers, is fucking horny, and she is not happy about it. But also she has songs like Oxytocin where she really likes it, and it's like it's very R&B in a way that the previous album had aesthetically, but this really feels like it nails that in like tone a lot better than that one for me. And like, yeah, it's got moments on it where it drops, like, I think I Didn't Change My Number is cute, but between Getting Older and the kind of fun Billie bossa nova, which against my better judgment, I really, really like, or something like Lost Cause, between the incredible left turn that is Goldwing and the just really honest, bare, emotional honesty of something like Halley's Comet. And then there's songs like Everybody Dies, which is just such a, that would also kind of, it feels almost at peace with the previous record. But I do think that the final like stretch of the record of Everybody Dies through Male Fantasy is great. And I just hate how the album also is fucking north of 50 minutes. And if you took off my two least favorite songs, Not My Responsibility and Overheated, which are songs that, like, the sentiment of these songs is found elsewhere on this album. You don't need these. If you took them off, the album is the perfect length. All of the songs are basically hits, and it solves so much of my issues. So it's like, oh, this is almost everything I wanted from her in a follow-up, but it's so close. It's so close. And I like this album more than When We Fall Asleep, but I think When We Fall Asleep is a better, like, cohesive statement almost, but like I don't really think if you know I gotta save one in a fire, I would probably save this one because I do have more of an emotional attachment to it.
Here's how I'd phrase the difference between the two records in one sentence. On the debut, Billie Eilish perfected this subversive image of a pop star, and the record has the limitations of that specific interest. On Happier Than Ever, Billie Eilish perfects this complicated image of a real, tangible human being, which is why I connect to it more ultimately, and why it feels like it has more staying power and more depth, even for its flaws. Yeah. And one thing I will say as well is, yes, you pointed out earlier that it lacks a big single. It lacks that big attention-grabbing single. And I love the fact that it lacks that, because it reflects to me that distinction between the first record's interest in that pop image and the second record's lack of interest in indulging that, and a greater interest in actually peeling it back and looking at what's underneath that image, which is why I think it makes sense that it didn't have a hugely successful single. And it makes even more sense that I believe the single that accompanied the album's announcement was Your Power, which is this very pared back sort of piano ballad. But anyway, I'll start with that. Thoughts are all over the place here, and a lot of them are sort of neatly fit as responses to things that Jake said. So I'll start with that midsection with that "Not My Responsibility" overheated back to back. It's weird, like one of these is, I think, the weakest piece on the record, and the other one I actually really, really like, and they're kind of redundant with each other, and in a certain sense also drag each other down by their proximity. Not My Responsibility, I think, is a curious place to zero in on, because I have complicated feelings about this. On the one hand, it is essentially a blunt diatribe against her objectification and the objectification of women in general. And her message, which is important, is dulled by presentation as lecture.
You agree.
And you can make these kinds of points, but and she has every right to make those kinds of points, especially considering what she's experienced.
And she does on the album, on other songs.
She shoots herself in the foot by lecturing, and I feel really like I shouldn't be saying that, because I mean, coming from you would call her out for lecturing, being a dude, although I'm not, but whatever, another topic. The thing is, the other side of that coin is that, on the other hand, Billie, as an artist, has hardly been silent about these things. And the people she's trying to speak to don't engage with subtlety, with messaging. They don't read into her songs. They need to be slapped in the face to hear anything. And that's what this track does. So there are these polar perspectives on what she's doing here that ultimately I don't enjoy listening to this track. I don't really get anything out of it. And I don't think it's made for people like me anyway. So I wish it weren't on the record for that reason. But on the other side of things, I kind of get why it exists, and I can't really take away from its existence, because she's put in a position where she has to speak like this, because otherwise she doesn't get heard. She gets, her image gets manipulated, or the things that she says in relation to this, the messages she put across, get papered over, or attention gets paid to other things. So this is her way of saying, fuck you, you can't ignore this. So I appreciate it for that reason. But then you have Overheated, which I think, again, this song is essentially about the same thing, but it does what Billie is best at doing, which is infusing those same ideas into a well-written song, in my opinion. One of my favorite things about this record, and my favorite things about the Billie Eilish aesthetic in general, and that incorporates Billie and Phineas, is the production style that the two have basically perfected on both of these records. These are, for the most part anyway, absolutely gorgeous records to listen to, and absolutely stunning in the impact of their minimal arrangements. And Phineas, I think, is producing even better than he did, generally speaking, on the first record, which is not to take away from how that record sounds, but I think that he's honed his craft even more on this album. The beat of Overheated, I swear to God, this is not me projecting. It reminds me so much of like an early Autechre EP beat, or like an Amber beat. There's just a timbre to it that's very similar to that early 90s IDM sound. And it's my favorite beat on this album. But yeah, I just think this song, I'm actually glad this song's on the record, and I like it quite a bit, but it's like, it really highlights the issue with the previous track's placement, and an issue generally that sometimes this record for its messiness and for how varied the subject matter that's covered on these songs is, often hobbles some of its impact by repetition. And I don't think that's a problem that is too extensive on this album. I think some of you maybe might have that problem to a greater extent than me, but there are certain points where, like here, I think more than ever, where it kind of becomes difficult to ignore. So yeah, that's, I think, my feeling on that particular aspect of the record, that central thesis of those tracks.
I want to say that, like, it's really just like, I think it really just comes to the fact that I don't find Overheated that sonically compelling. It's like the rest of the album. It's like, you know, Phineas is doing a whole lot with very little, and that's just one of those songs that just doesn't work for me. So if you take that in conjunction with the song that it's repetitive with, you have an album that's like a little bit closer to something like 45 minutes, which, like, it's still messy, don't get me wrong, but if you made it that length instead and you took off those songs, I just think it undeniably would be a lot tighter and a lot more, like, you know, again, it's she's making these points throughout the album in very multifaceted ways, I would argue too. It's like, it frustrates me because, like, yeah, that diatribe even is kind of well written. Like, it's compelling when I'm listening to it as a diatribe and not music, but like, you make these points on songs like Happier Than Ever, songs like Male Fantasy, songs like My Future, and it's just like they're interwoven there. You don't need it, but like some people might, because, you know, people be dumb, but like I get it, but also
also it should be said as well that it is quite powerful to a certain extent, and then there's a part where she starts going society with it, and it's like yeah, that's the part where I tune out.
We really do be living in a society with men.
When she was talking about herself and her body and how her body is perceived at the start of it, I was like, this is quite, you know, compelling. And then it just gets a bit too, I guess, grandiose in what it's trying to do as a monologue. But, you know, that's my feelings on that. I guess while we're talking about weak points, because I have a lot I love about this record, I might as well just get the other weak points out of the way as well. I do think there are a couple of songs on here that I would call filler, and this is not to vary from Jake, because I know Jake said he likes these songs, and I'm not trying to be, well, actually, there's just a couple of songs I don't particularly care for as much. One of them is Billie Bossa Nova, which actually I think has some good vocal melodies from Billie. I think she sings really well on this track. It just feels a little undercooked musically. I was talking about how Phineas develops his mastery of his minimalist aesthetic on this album, and I think this track is a kind of curious exception to that. The Bossa Nova beat sounds really like, it sounds too much like a preset. It sounds really kind of cheap sounding in a way that his minimalism doesn't sound on the rest of the record. And I'm sure it's not a preset. I'm sure he designed it by hand. It just feels a little bit insubstantive. And my least favorite song on this record is Everybody Dies, which I think is not a bad song again, but it feels redundant and also kind of disconnected to the themes of the rest of the album as a song about mortality, which is not to say that Billie isn't interested in mortality, but there are these very specific things that she talks about in relation to herself throughout the record. And Everybody Dies feels a little bit like it's kind of just there. Jake, you kind of said that it reminisces on certain vibes or ideas of the first album, and I agree. And that's why I feel it's a little bit, wish that it hadn't made this album personally. But those are personal opinions. I mean, obviously mileage will vary on these songs, and for the most part, the rest of this record I think is sensational. And I will say that this is an album that has grown on me, and
me too.
It's definitely a thing we say a lot, and I think that's reflective of how complicated a lot of the albums we review are, and the nature of what we do as a podcast when we have a week to spend with an album. But this in particular is an album that's grown on me. I've listened to it 4 times now, and every time I've liked it more than the last time. And every time I think I've appreciated what it's trying to do in terms of the macro more than I had before. I think that's kind of necessary and probably even part of the point. I'll echo, Jake, your sentiment that Getting Older is a stellar opener. It's a perfect status update as well. Again, it lays the groundwork for what the album is. It's an ideal opener in a certain sense because it introduces to you a number of the different themes of the record. Because it's a more complicated record than this is what's going on with me. It's that all of these different conflicting states are going on with me, and it's messed up and hard to explain and complicated. And Billie sort of leads you into that with that opener. It's that she's experiencing this mindset that's sometimes equally self-empowering and self-destructive. And that dynamic, that dichotomy of self-empowerment and self-destruction comes full circle beautifully on the last two songs, which I'll get to. What I love about the sequencing of this record, which I think for the most part is really good, is that it is purposeful, and she's laying a groundwork here that she will revisit and come full circle with at the album's conclusion. I'll also stand up for I Didn't Change My Number, which I think builds on this nicely. It details aspects of her unhealthy relationship. And I like the fact that, again, the way this album is constructed, she at times spoon feeds you information that gives you an unclear picture of the situation, and then gives you more and more as the album goes on to kind of complicate it. Like in Getting Older, she makes a very loose reference to abuse and being abused. And that's it. That's the only mention of it on the song. And so it's like, oh, okay. She says the line, I think, I didn't ask to be abused, or something akin to that, which is kind of like a, oh shit moment when you're listening to that song. And she says that because it's a hard hitting line, and she underplays it as well, which Billie always is great at doing, underplaying a lyric so that you don't necessarily notice it until you're paying attention. Then it hits you like a ton of bricks. So yeah, she introduces that very subtly on that song. And then I Didn't Change My Number. It's not a song about being in an abusive relationship per se, although it could be read that way. Billie's very careful about the detail that she gives and the image that she gives, and the way in which your impression of what a particular song is about depends on earlier songs on the record is another way in which this is a great album in terms of construction, because these songs are stronger together than in isolation. I Didn't Change My Number has one of the best lyrics on the record, which is that chorus lyric, if I didn't change my number, I only changed who I believed in, which is a great lyric because of the way that it ties the real world tangibility of like physical consequences of an abusive relationship, changing my number, with the underlying emotions that drove her escape from that world, changing who you believe in. It's a great connection between what's physically happening with Billie and what's mentally happening with Billie in this little couplet. And so it's one of my favorite lines in the album. I love it. Really good song. And then My Future, which is another one of the early singles, is a great example of how Billie is also expanding her sound and her image as a performer as well into the realm of torch singers like Julie London, who I believe inspired the album cover. It's a beautiful, this sort of torch singer Billie thing that she does on this album, which she didn't really do on the first album. Even on the ballads, it was very kind of, the ballads on the previous records are very kind of fragile and haunted, whereas the ballads here have a little bit more gusto to them, even if they are still minimal. And that represents her interest in torch singers and, you know, the classic balladeers of the 60s and 70s. And My Future is a great example, I think, of Billie slotting into that, her developing her artistic personality so that feels natural. And also it's just, I think, a really inspiring song, honestly, about self-love and embracing the power of personal agency, particularly at a delicate time where everyone wants to make you their property, either as an artist, as a lover, as a child, or any combination of those. I think My Future sentiment is simple but really effective, I think. And then you get one of my favorite pieces of sequencing on the record, which is the next three tracks, Oxytocin, Goldwing, and Lost Cause, which I think are interrelated in really interesting ways. Oxytocin and Goldwing, particularly as this double act, a 1-2 punch of heavier songs. And it's this point on the record where Billie starts to drift from the earlier theme of the album, which is, I guess, how she is growing in the aftermath of trauma, both implicitly the trauma of an abusive relationship and the trauma of her fame, which if you don't think that it's fair to call it trauma, then you're just not paying attention. But yeah, so she explores that idea with the first sort of set of songs, and then you get a slight shift with Oxytocin where she moves into this different sort of aspect of her personality, which is her negotiating her sexuality, her negotiating her self-expression in her personal life, her negotiating who she is as a woman in the wake of having experienced these traumatic things. And that is that the fact that development comes here after the state of Billie is introduced in the first few songs is meaningful, I think. Oxytocin is a club banger where Billie envisions herself as a seductive temptress. It absolutely knocks. Again, one of the best beats on the record. And then Goldwing is a more sinister track where Billie is warning this figure who might be her younger self, or just another woman in her position, of the predatory dangers that are surrounding her and disguising themselves. So you have these two songs together that are kind of like, one, Billie is the seductive temptress, kind of hunting men or like treating men in terms of the sexual conquest in the subversive way. And then Goldwing is kind of the mirror where Billie is kind of peeling that back and warning her younger self of what's to come, of the fact that she will need to adopt this harder shell in order to deal with the mistreatment that she's going to get, you know, in terms of her sexuality and her identity. And then it's like these two are tied together with Lost Cause, which comes at the perfect moment, in my opinion. It's this fuck you song to a selfish and self-indulgent ex-lover. The sequencing of these three songs as a kind of trilogy is brilliant, as it both recontextualizes Lost Cause as a single, which I thought was a decent single, but kind of left me underwhelmed. But here it gives a sense of narrative conclusion to the ideas of the previous songs. Billie as this seductive temptress, this exaggerated image. Billie as this fragile person, or this person who is having to steel themselves and prepare for that pain. And then Billie as this stronger than ever figure who's emerged out and is more realistic than the, you know, the caricature of that in Oxytocin, that you get a real sense of how she's developed and how she's become stronger out of what she's experienced. Also has to be said that Phineas' bass work on Lost Cause is excellent. It goes stupid. Love that bass on that song. So yeah, I think at this point you have this album that's developing in this really interesting way, minus, you know, Billie Bossa Nova, which is cute, but kind of gets in the way a little bit. But yeah, this album is developing in this really interesting way. And then you get that midsection. Well, there's also the song Halley's Comet, which I don't want to skip over, which I'm a little conflicted on this song as well. It's a good song. It follows, I'm still quite haven't figured out its placement on the album. It's this softer ballad about unambiguously falling head over heels in love, which is kind of weird to have a unambiguous head over heels in love song coming right after Lost Cause, which is a song about fuck a man. You know, so it threw me off a little
happily,
bit.
Tyler, happily.
It threw me off a little bit, and it still kind of does. Although I guess maybe that's the point. Maybe having this song about being unambiguously in love is a way of doubling down on that fuck you to her ex. Or maybe the twist, and I love that Billie doesn't say this or make this like explicit if that is the case, but maybe the twist is that it's a love song to herself, in the same way that My Future is a song about her embracing her own possibilities and celebrating herself and self-love. You could read it in that way as well. So yeah, it's an interesting song, and I definitely feel my relationship with that song developing. But then you get Not My Responsibility and Overheated, which I've talked about those, and Everybody Dies, which again is a good song. I just don't really think it fits on this album. And then I think the album's back half, I totally agree with Jake. Otherwise, the album's back half hits a real wind and feels like Billie is really tying everything together with some of her most commanding songwriting on this record. Your Power in particular is an absolutely show-stopping piano ballad that to me represents all of Billie's great strengths as a songwriter, and doesn't have a single unnecessary embellishment. NDA again kind of follows that up and has a similar relationship to that song as Oxytocin has to Goldwing as well. It's this kind of more darker side of her state of mind, her fame, and where she's at. And then Therefore I Am, I love the way the NDA goes into Therefore I Am, because it's another example of recontextualization as well that makes the album better, because Therefore I Am was a single and it was the weakest single in my opinion. I didn't really get it, but then in the flow of this album, when you get caught up in it and it comes straight out of NDA, it just fits like a glove. So I love that. And I'll finish off by just talking about those last two tracks. I mean, Jake's kind of already telegraphed it, so I don't need to say too much, but the title track is a really nice climax to this album. I really like the nuanced description of a relationship that fizzles out through lack of passion. Again, Billie throughout this record finds ways to describe, a relationship that may be abusive, a relationship that may be all these different things, but never, I guess, makes it feel like this two-dimensional thing that she's drawing from. You never get a full picture of it because it is a private thing to Billie that she's electing to reveal as much as she chooses to reveal. But it's very nuanced in how it's described in the title track. When you feel feelings drifting away, when you feel that a certain emotion is turning, that you feel for this person is turning into a resentment based in the things that they do or don't do. That compressed, heavy explosion at the core of the song, been compared by many to I Know the End, which I think it serves a sort of similar function, especially considering both of these records are records where that explosion gains a lot of its power from the subdued tone that precedes it. But yeah, it's anchored by, again, that passionate double-tracked vocal from Billie, and I love the descent into static that cuts off hard at the end. And then you have Male Fantasy, which is a really curious epilogue. And I've gone back and forth on this track, but ultimately I've come around on it in a big way. And I like the way, Jake, you've talked about the themes in the song of the hypocrisy of the ways in which men perceive women and men perceive themselves, which is definitely a thing that Billie goes after in the song. But what I love about the song is that it actually complicates the perspective of this previous song. It's almost like a response to the title track, because it's never as easy with relationships as saying fuck you and moving on. That in itself is a fantasy that Billie indulges in the title track. It is her female fantasy in the title track of this album. And the closing track is her reckoning with the reality of that, the fact that it was a fantasy. She fairly castigates his male fantasy of her, but is more than willing to tear apart her own fantasies in this closing track. And to me, it shows stronger than anything how smart Billie really is, and how anyone who views her maturation on this record as disingenuous, I think needs to pay more attention, especially to these two songs. Neither feels forced in the slightest, and both tie a bow on the album. So yeah, ultimately I'm left in this position where I think there's a lot of development and a lot of growth on this album that I absolutely love to see from Billie. And I think that her great capital G fantastic pop album is still ahead of her. I think there's a very strong chance it could be the very next album that she makes. It just needs a little bit more of honing and a little bit more of refining the edges, which I think this album doesn't consistently do quite enough. And that's a little bit frustrating, but ultimately I'm left with, by and large, very positive feelings on this record, and a sense of real hope for Billie as an artist and as a performer in terms of what the longevity that she has. I was always unsure of her longevity after the first record, but this record cements to me that I think she really has the power to stay around and the power to be a really important voice, more than and beyond just an important pop star.
To I think segue into the people who have not gotten to talk about something yet, is that I think it's important I voice one particular thing, sort of kind of building off the fact that my lukewarm defense for a song I really like, being Everybody Dies, is that I've always maintained that the most essential part of growing up is the ultimate realization that one is going to die. So I feel like that sort of placement is just kind of inherent, even if it's not particularly coherent. That said, the coherent part of this album doesn't really matter, because there is kind of an Achilles heel with this record. That being, if you are not like interested in charting the progression of Billie Eilish as a person, there's basically no reason to listen to this at all. Like none, not a single one I can think of. So if you find yourself in that precarious position, I don't exactly blame you for coming away from it lukewarm or even cold.
All I will say is that I didn't care really all that much about Billie Eilish as a person before this record as well. And this record made me care about her a little bit more. So I have to give it that.
Yeah, I thought this was fine. Really, the only thing I can talk about that hasn't been talked about is how sonically, which is the biggest thing that I care about, because I have no investment in Eilish as a person, is just how it compares to When We All Fall Asleep. And I found it to be simultaneously more adventurous and more safe.
I feel that.
And I think generally that kind of pervades my entire perspective on the album, of just thinking it's fine. Not for me so much. If you're invested in Eilish, then this is probably going to be a record that connects with you pretty well. But I also just I can count on maybe three hands, maybe on one hand the number of pop star records that are really deeply personal that I connect with in any way whatsoever.
My perspective isn't entirely too dissimilar from Morgan's, in that I think I'm coming from a very similar boat of interest of like, yeah, there's interesting parts here that have been spoken about by Tyler and Jake. If you want to know what those are, rewind the video. I don't know. One thing I personally found as a bit of a draw to this was I really did find myself, I'm not like a huge fan of that first Billie Eilish album, but I did find myself really connecting with the more adventurous, kind of dark and almost fun parts of it. And I think this album really stripped back a lot of the just pure kind of poppier joy infused in the darker sides of that record, and I didn't really care for that all too much. It just sounds a little ho-hum, like you've got to make the serious follow-up. And while that can be accredited to being part of the narrative, it's just not something I'm terribly interested in listening to, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. There, I think it definitely serves a purpose. It serves an interesting purpose, even from a narrative standpoint. But it's also, I'm just kind of inherently less interested in it overall.
It's definitely her attempting to make Billie Eilish's melodrama. And I don't say that in a disparaging way at all. I just think that's a trend in music that is like very, very prescient right now. The desire to make that kind of sophomoric maturation record.
I'm trying to think, maybe your commenters could help us out here. If there's like other records that you feel like precedents to this in pop music, this kind of shift and this kind of record. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I feel like there's got to be something out there. But yeah,
I do think though that I do think though in 10 years this will be the record that will be like the hipster's choice for the best Billie Eilish record.
Yeah, I could totally see that happening. I think in less time than that, even when she has a couple more records out. But like I said, I'm really curious to see what she does with the next record, because again, I think that if like 3 or 4 songs were culled from this, I feel like, and this is where I feel like the general consensus on records sometimes is a bit facile, because I feel like people are really dogging this, and I feel like if a couple of songs were trimmed from it, the same people would be all over it, and they're not really engaging with it. They're just like seeing things they don't like and then extrapolating the rest of the album onto them. And so it's like, to me, I don't know. I'm glad that you all kind of understand where I'm coming from with my weird feelings anyway.
Yeah, I'd rather have a frustrating record like this, or like not frustrating, but like it's an inherently more complicated record, even if it doesn't. Yeah, exactly, Morgan.
Yeah.
I think the short version of it, I think for all of us in some ways, is that, and shortened to a degree that sort of spares the important nuances, is that I think we all find this one more narratively interesting than the first one, and less musically interesting. And it's just it's a variation on how much mileage you get out of those things.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. I find it more musically interesting, but I agree with what you said.
Well, see, that's the thing, though.
There's no way I could have said that without being a fucking faggot. So there you go.
I was gonna say Tyler is being a bitch, but I think there's
at least
truth.
You know that.
There's truth to both perspectives here, because I feel like the people who like really bought into that first record were like people who necessarily like the production of it is kind of, it's definitely integral to the enjoyment, but it's not exactly like the reason that I love that album or anything. Whereas the people who are a little bit more mild on it, the production is kind of what used to be, or what people kind of find refreshing or different about it. So when you have an album like this, where it's a little bit more laid back, it's a lot less aggressive, and it's way more built upon trying to parse through subtleties than being something that's like traditionally like is going to like jump out and grab your attention and really enrapture you. So I feel like this one definitely makes you work a little bit harder for it, and that's the problem, is that if you're not willing to put in a little bit of work, then it's just probably not gonna fuck with you, and that I can't fucking begrudge anybody for feeling that way at all, frankly.
I think it also kind of comes down to a little bit, to a certain extent, about what you want or enjoy most about pop music, right? Do you enjoy do you enjoy the conceptual nature, the attitude, the personality, or do you like want to hear really about who these people are as people? And there's a distinction between those two records in terms of what they focus around. And anyway, I kind of already made that point, so it's a bit redundant, but you get what I mean.
I'm just really glad that I wasn't the only person who liked this, because I was really afraid that was going to be the case.
Oh, Jake, I was terrified it was going to be the case for me as well. So
I was going to be like, oh God, everybody's just going to say it's boring, and I'm just going to look like a fucking idiot.
Nah, it's good. I 80% of this record I love. All right.
Yeah, I think the broad perspectives is the best possible outcome we could have hoped for.
Yeah. All right. Well, favorite tracks and ratings then for Billie Eilish's Happier Than Ever.
Favorite tracks on here, title track absolutely is my number one here, Happier Than Ever. And then I'm also going to say I really, really like Haley's Comet and the opener, Getting Older. A lot of other good stuff here. Least favorite song, it's a toss-up between, I feel basically the same amount of like/dislike for Not My Responsibility and Overheated, but just because I feel like if I could only take away one of these to improve the album, I would end up taking away Not My Responsibility. So I'll say that one. And I give the album a very, very tentative 7.5. That is totally likely to become an 8 in the future, totally likely to go back down to a 7 in the future. I don't know. But yeah.
All right. My three favorite tracks here are Getting Older, Oxytocin, and Probably Therefore I Am. Least favorite, I guess, yeah. You know what I'll say? B. Yeah, no, I'm not going to be creative. It's Not My Responsibility. That song's stupid. Give it a 5.
I will say my three favorites are title track, Therefore I Am, and Oxytocin. Least favorite, I actually don't care for. I didn't change my number all that much. Yeah, 5.5 out of 10 from myself.
Bold. So that's moi.
Bold.
No, I don't want to go to the beach that makes you bold.
Wish I had your strength, Morgan.
Really, braver than the troops.
Saoirse.
Just you're in like free speech jail, and it's like, what are you in here for? I said like a neo-Nazi slogan. What are you in here for? I gave a 5.5 to a Billie Eilish record. Like,
yeah, I gave the James Gunn movie a 4 out of 5, and I gave the Billie Eilish record a fucking 3 out of 5. I'm in prison.
Looking forward to the inevitable day where we cover a BTS album and we're all mid on it, and then K-pop Twitter murders all of us.
That's not happening. No. It's not. I rarely, if ever, take a stand on these kinds of things.
That's true.
But that's not happening.
I think that is for the best.
I mean, August is really disappointed.
For a multitude of reasons.
The only BTS we're ever going to cover on this podcast is Built to Spill.
Hey!
We're not. You're telling me we're not covering big transvestite starfish?
Damn.
Fuck.
We're taking a. They actually they used a slur. They used a slur on Twitter, so they're cancelled now, unfortunately.
Oh shit!
Wait, that's not a thing you made up?
No, it is. I'm just running with it.
Oh.
It's a
fucking idiot.
Fucking fool.
Anyway, Saoirse, did you give your favorite tracks and ratings?
I had two left.
Oh, okay.
So it's Oxytocin. Therefore, I am and happier than ever. And my least favorite is Not My Responsibility. Real sorry, Billy, you tried, and it's a 7.5 from me.
That's the most condescending way of saying that's your least favorite track ever. Anyway, my three favorite tracks on this record are Getting Older, Your Power, and Happier Than Ever. Least favorite track, I'm going to say Everybody Dies, just to be different. Although, yeah, I concur with all the sentiment about Not My Responsibility, even though I, as I said, have a bit more of a complicated feeling on that. I think I agree with Jake as well. This is like the definition of a 7.5 album to me. This is like that. This is the distilled, that rating distilled into a record is this album. So 7.5.
So that's a 6.6 average. There are only 3 records we're given that rating to.
Oh boy.
The Million Masks of God by the Manchester Orchestra.
The
Big
Manchester
Mess.
Orchestra.
Big Miss, yes. Big Miss, gang. We out here.
Are we?
By Danny Elfman.
I am.
Oh, that was the Danny Elfman album? I forgot what that was.
Very fitting that these two records should get the same rating, I think.
Yeah. And also, I Won't Care How You Remember Me by Tiger's Jaw.
Oh, an album we reviewed.
Yes.
Shut up.
I just said that
stab
to
your
push
parents.
Morgan. I just said that to push Morgan buttons. I'm sorry. All right.
Morgan reenacting the plot of The Guest.
Well, let's move on to our. This is I should have said this at the top, but this is really our pop episode today. Let's move on to our second review of the day, which is. Bleachers is, I hope I'm not getting this wrong when I say the solo project of Jack Antonoff.
I believe you're correct. Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
So Bleachers is the solo project of Jack Antonoff.
Anton Jackoff.
Jack Antonoff.
Ant jacked this off?
You're telling me a shrimp jacked this off? Anyway.
Glad we're happily scraping the bottom of the barrel this episode, folks.
Oh yeah.
Oh hey, come now. Got plenty to say.
Morgan, Tyler, when him and Morgan are having sex.
Gonna kill you.
That's the least erotic image you've ever.
Why do you never look at me during?
I thought we exercised all of this with Doki Doki, and yet it keeps coming back.
I think it's cute that you thought that.
So this is
it'll keep coming
There's
back
no
and
escape.
coming.
It'll keep coming back until it's not funny anymore. It's not funny anymore. Try some different jokes.
Yeah.
No one got my Kanye reference. Doesn't
I was going more towards the Dillinger Escape Plan personally.
Jake and no one else.
This is the third album from Jack Antonoff's solo project Bleachers. And in my opinion, this is a project defined by what I would describe the Bleachers project, not this album. The Bleachers project is something I would say is defined by the description of unrealized potential. Jack Antonoff, I think is it gets more complicated because I do like this album, but Jack Antonoff is a really increasingly important figure. I've watched quite a few interviews with him over the last few weeks that he's done. He was on I can't remember which talk show it was, but he was on a talk show. Anthony Fantano did a great interview with him as well. Yeah. And I had this perception of Jack Antonoff as this kind of shadowy pop figure who very much was like a part of the machine of defining the sound of pop music. And to a certain extent, he has sort of defined the sound of pop music to a certain extent in recent years. But he is, I'm delighted to say, a much more self-aware and less messianic figure than he's made out to be in the culture.
He is just a dude.
He's just a motherfucking dude who loves Bruce Springsteen. And that is that is this album to a T. I feel like I could be wrong. I'm anticipating some division as to the, I guess, appeal of that idea musically, but I find it more or less pretty fucking endearing, is how much the dude loves and respects his influences and how much he throws himself head first into them. And what I mean by that is that these are Springsteen pastiche songs for the most part. There are some that aren't, but there are mostly that they are. And my opinion on this record is, if you're going to do a Springsteen pastiche, you've got to put your fucking entire pussy into it. And I think Jack does. I think these are songs that are passionately indebted to those references, and for the most part have a real sort of gusto to them that is absolutely aided by his increasing skill as a producer and his versatility as a producer as well. Like, people think of him as the dude who makes these really quiet pop albums, but if you actually think about the things he's produced recently, whether you like them or not, if you think about the production of a record like Daddy's Home versus the production of a record like Chemtrails Over the Country Club, those are albums that sound completely unlike each other just in terms of this palette. And so he is, I think, a more dynamic producer who's able to adjust what he does to the styles of his, the people he's working for really well and really capably. Which is why it was always interesting to me to really explore what is he like as his own musical personality. And seeing this goofy dude who's indebted to Springsteen surprised me to a certain extent, although I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising, but it is. It very much fits into the lineage of bands like Vampire Weekend, although I'll say I like this album a lot more than I like anything Vampire Weekend have done recently. But anyway, digressing further, this is very much a record that is... There's not a lot of depth to this album. It's very sort of surface level pop music. There's certainly interesting topics that are tackled on certain songs, but it very much feels to me like a carefree album in a way that, especially after we've just discussed this emotionally intense Billie Eilish record that's about this person and all these multifacets, dipping back and forth between these two albums this week, it kind of felt like vacation putting this on, because it's such a relaxing album to listen to, and an album where you can just sort of switch your brain off without feeling like, it's just completely dumbed down either. I don't know. I think it makes for a less interesting podcast segment, and I will concede that we are reviewing this because, yet again, much like last week, we're kind of waiting for big albums to really come out. But I will say that I was initially, I was looking for a really cool album for us to review next to Billie Eilish, and I couldn't find it. But I will say, the more I listened to this record this week, the more I have enjoyed it for what it is. It's not an amazing album. It's not anything to stop the presses about, but it's an album that I think is satisfying in a quite immediate way, and has some really great songs on it that function in the same emotional tenor as their points of inspiration, and do a pretty good job, I think, of mining that feeling. And I guess your mileage will vary, I guess, on the extent to which you find that interesting. It's certainly not an album that needs an analysis, although I'll get into the specific songs a little bit later on, whereas other people talk about them. But yeah, it's I don't know. I've had a good time listening to this album this week.
I think the album is good. I would to counter, I would say that we probably feel almost exactly the same amount of affinity for the album. Your description is just simply because you're better at being charitable to something like this than I am. So if I may provide a bit of a counter in the sense to just sort of get it out of the way, because yet again, Jake with another boring opinion, it's just like, this is good. It's 30 minutes and change. It is something that on the surface of every single song, I can't really point out anything about it that is like not like that it's, I'm not necessarily in love or even like all of it, but there's nothing about it that feels unsuccessful. If you're making a Springsteen pastiche, this is about as one could expect to do if that's like your only goal. Like, you don't want to blend it with anything. You don't want to like try and like infuse it with like another artist or another approach, or even change like the tenor of the songs and what they would be about. Then this is about as well as you can expect. And if you like Jack Antonoff's work, I think this will probably hit you pretty decently. As somebody who's a bit more mixed on Jack's work as a producer, I find the album mildly frustrating because its biggest weakness is, weirdly enough, the thing about it that you would expect from Jack Antonoff to be the best, and that's the production. And again, not saying that it's bad per se, but like, I just don't care for how this album like sounds. The vocals on some of these tracks are mixed in such a strange way that just doesn't really complement the honest, rootsy vibe that he's really going for, which is made all the more apparent when Bruce Springsteen is there and on a song, and you're like, oh, so this is what this could sound like if it was being performed by him. Basically, every single song here is a different shade of varying levels of good, but like, all of them would be improved if they were just Bruce Springsteen songs. And I know that's such a vapid criticism to make, especially when you consider the intentions of this record. But it's like, they're just moments where any time a decision is made that steers away from being that pastiche, where it kind of suffers a little bit. Like on 91, why are the vocals mixed like this? I don't like it. It's supposed to be something with a little bit more impact, and it sounds so distant. There are moments on this where they sound so like weirdly mixed and then hollow, or like, something like you would hear on like a Lana Del Rey album or something. And it's just kind of like, I don't really care for how these things mesh together. I mean, it's not a combo that makes me like recede into my skin or anything. It's not a terrible combo. It could work for some people, but it's just difficult. You have Chinatown immediately after it too, which I think is pretty much my favorite song on the album, if I'm gonna be safe about it, because yeah, Bruce's contributions very good, but it also just has a lot of forward momentum. It's a song that gets the people going, and How Dare You Want More has a really, really nice sentiment at the heart of it. I think that for the most part the songs are actually written pretty well. It's just that, again, some of them are so brief, and the album itself is so brief, and the sentiment itself is just so kind of fleeting that it's like, the commitment is just not here when it comes to the writing or the production. And it's like just enough to be good. It's just enough to be enjoyable. And then it just fucking infuriatingly stops at just good enough. Again, basically epitomized by Big Life and Secret Life, which, good names. I think Stop Making This Hurt is a little bit good of a bounce back, I think, from two of the more nondescript songs. And then it kind of goes back to that with Don't Go Dark. But I think 45 is has one of the stronger hooks on the album. I don't really care for what really just kind of dips this a tiny bit below the surface of like, giving this like a higher rating, because like, this is still made of things that I generally enjoy, is that I do think that it ends rather weakly. I think both Strange Behavior and What I Do With All This Faith, songs that aren't devoid of interesting sentiments, but are totally devoid of interesting musical ones for me. Jack is just so like, it's like he's focused on his idea of a Springsteen pastiche, and God love him, he probably did it as well as he could be expected to. But as somebody who's lived with that guy's music for a long time, I know what I like about it, and infusing it with the tiny touches of personality that he have really just only serve to detriment an experience that is vaguely pleasant. I enjoy it, and it doesn't last long enough for any of it to get annoying or outstay its welcome, but it's a worthwhile listen, but only just so.
Well, I'll push back against the thing you led with, which is that I definitely think, now you've said all that I like this album considerably more than you.
Fair. I just can't imagine our ratings being that different.
No, sure, but I understand you having to take a contrast tone because I kind of introduced this with saying I like it quite a bit, and I mean, yeah, we do.
Yeah, I'm being more negative on purpose, but like it's just because that's the most interesting things I can say about it.
Yeah. Again, I won't go in deep yet, or not that I ever had a deep thing to go into, but I'll just say a couple things. One, I do disagree, but I think this comes down to personal taste as well. I really like the production of this album. I think it sounds really good, and I particularly like how well it balances layers in some of these songs, and especially in some of the best songs as well. I think Chinatown's a personal example that I really like in that regard. That song, I think, probably has something to do with Bruce being on there, but like last couple of listens, that one's really like genuinely, I felt like a bit of a lump in my throat listening to it. Like it just gives me the same sort of emotional sensibility as his best songs. And also I'll shout out Don't Go Dark as well. Is like this song, if you just replaced any song on Born in the USA with this song, it would be very difficult to tell the difference, apart from the fact that it's obviously not Bruce singing. It's a very like straight out of the Born in the USA playbook, and I dig it. I think my favorite song on this album is Stop Making This Hurt, which I think is a perfect pop song, like 10 out of 10 pop song, I think, in the vein of the 80s revivalism, made more maximal than ever by bands like M83 and the 1975. And I'll say I really like the line that the title drop on this song, if we take the sadness out of Saturday Night, what else will be left? Will it be worth the fight? Is a great title drop because it changes the meaning of the album title. It becomes, instead of take the sadness out of Saturday Night being an instruction that Jack Antonoff is giving you, the real context is that he's saying that, well, no, Saturday nights would be incomplete without that emotional balance. And I think the song gets at that. And the fact that you should be questioning sentiments like take the sadness out of Saturday Night. You should be thinking about the way that nostalgia colors and covers up the more complex reality of the glory days, as Bruce himself once sang about that exact idea. So I think there is a level of depth in certain songs like this that do elevate this above standard pop album, a level of depth in some of the lyricism and a level of depth in terms of the production layering. Like even on the weaker songs that I don't particularly care for, with one exception, I think there is one song on this record that genuinely sucks, by the way. But even on the songs I don't care for as much, like Secret Life, there's like a Robert Fripp, Brian Eno, St. Elmo's Fire-esque guitar in the back of this song. That's such a great detail that
I never would have thought of that in a million years, but you're totally right. What a good comp.
Yeah, it's not an amazing song, but I love the sense of detail of that inclusion. It adds a little bit of an extra layer to it. So yeah, I still can't find it in myself to just be mid on this album, when every so often and reasonably consistently, Jack will do something that has a sense of his personality as a producer in it that I appreciate in a world where you have a lot of pop music that just sounds anonymous. So I guess that's generally where I'm at broadly. And I don't think, Jake, that yours and my perspectives contradict each other in any way. No. I just think that it's
literally just how much mileage you get out of this. That's
yeah. Anyway, I'll shut up now. I'm curious, the other three who haven't spoken yet, what if they have any thoughts on the things we've said or on this album.
I had literally one sentence I wanted to say before I gave way, so I want to do my proper thoughts later.
Cool.
And it's literally that it is not. We have stated already that this is obviously Bruce Springsteen pastiche, but aside from an offhanded comment, it is such a Bruce Springsteen pastiche. He got Bruce Springsteen on the fucking record. Like, I mean, he's trying that hard.
King shit, honestly.
I mean, it's just like he probably got to meet the boss, and that was probably a big fucking deal for him. So good on you, Jack.
He got Bruce Springsteen on the record. Yeah, you could say, how hard is he trying? But also, I mean, Bruce Springsteen agreed to be on this album. He obviously saw something in the music.
Also, it's Bruce Springsteen. Don't fucking complain. Shut up.
And the song is good enough to merit that. It's not like a card that is like, oh, we have Springsteen on this song, so it's better now. Like it's a song that is good enough for him to be on it.
Yeah. And a duet as well. Like it's like, again, it really doesn't hang on Springsteen because he's only a part of the fabric of the song anyway, not the central focal point.
But yeah, I'm much in the same boat as Tyler on this one. Very easy, palatable, very enjoyable record that outside of some of the singles, like Stop Making This Hurt and Chinatown, I will never think about again. It's utterly disposable in the best way. And I enjoy it very much, as this is very much my bag of pop music.
You know, I liked it for what it was. I didn't love it. I thought it was fine mostly. I think the really nice, hypnotizingly catchy chorus of 91 is a strong way to open the record. I think the really those like whistling bell sounds of Chinatown sound really pretty. Of course, having Springsteen on the song is cool enough. It kind of feels like a thumbs up he's giving to the whole project, like a hey, it's good enough.
Hey. They grow up so fast.
Springsteen is a regular paisan.
Yeah.
Hey.
I've obviously not been the hugest proponent of Antonoff ever on this podcast, but I do think this production has a lot of soul and personality to it for the most part. It does distinctly sound like something he made. I have to agree a bit with Jake, where I found the vocals to be kind of the weakest, like how those were placed to be the weakest part. I thought their waterlogging with reverb was pretty disgusting, and it made it feel really hollow and impactless, honestly, which...
Yeah, that does, not to cut you off, but that does remind me of a point that I wanted to make earlier, is that if this was a fun record, it would go up like a full star, maybe a star and a half. A vocalist.
Get fucking Nate Ruiz on the phone.
Do it. What are you doing?
And really that's what takes away a lot of it from me, because when I think of Springsteen's very best stuff, I think of that very passionate, just over the top vocal presence he has, and this, I mean, obviously doesn't have that, and that's definitely Antonoff doing his own thing. But I feel had the vocals had a little more power, a little more gusto behind them, I would have connected with this a lot more. I would have felt like it was a good record, even a great record, instead of just one I'm like, yeah, that's a fine album.
Yeah, I actually don't disagree. In fact, that's probably my biggest reservation as well, is that, look, Jack Antonoff, I think, is a great producer, a born pop songwriter as well, but he's not a pop star, which is not inherently a problem, right? But it is a limitation. No. It is a limitation. I think he's conscious of it, but it does mean that his pop songs often have a ceiling, because there's that X factor that a great pop presence gives a song that he doesn't quite I think he does a pretty good... I think actually he does reach it on Stop Making This Hurt, which I think he sounds great on. And also I'd shout out How Do You Want More as well. I think vocally pretty good there too. But he has some certain limitations, and I cannot disagree with Morgan at all that this would be better if Nate Ruiz were singing the entire album. I think maybe even Jack himself would acknowledge that.
The thing is about those two songs, right, is like Jack Antonoff is a music nerd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he's such an amazing producer, right? Why he's such a successful producer. And it's not just that he knows the correct influences to pull from, so he knows the correct starlets to work with to project his career, you know?
Yeah.
And when he's completely embodying that pop star persona, it feels more like, to me, he's channeling his music nerddom to impersonate other people who are great pop stars, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, totally.
I mean, exactly. He's the nerd who wears big glasses and goes on Jimmy Kimmel's show and uses words like Jesus and Mary Chain-esque.
I do sympathize with you, August. I kind of wanted some give me some Adam Raised to Cain energy on this album, and then we'll be fucking going with it.
Yeah. there's like the biggest Bruce eras that come through here is obviously Born in the USA, and also there's a little bit of E Street Shuffle energy on here, which is one of my absolute favorite Springsteen records. So yeah, I have that endearingness for that reason. I will say though, I don't think it's actually been mentioned. There's one song here which I think is just total shit, and that's Big Life, which sounds awful.
Oh yes.
It's kind of just there, I think, as an artificial extension of the pulse of How Do You Want More that comes before it. But the issue there is that that song doesn't need to be extended. I think that song is the perfect length. That's a really cool song. It has the great sax solo. I know sax solos or whatever, but it's a really good one for what it is.
Sax solos are not whatever.
Well, they're kind of a bit of a cliche, Saoirse, and I think that...
But like they never... for a reason...
Yeah, but it's not like pasted in there. Like there's a great moment in How Do You Want More where the song kind of goes quiet and you have the guitar playing off the sax as it's introduced in this great little instrumental bridge, and then that builds into the sax solo. It's not like it's copy pasted into the back half of the song. Yeah. It's really integrated really nicely, and I love the sentiment of the song is good too. This idea of how do you want more is this thing that Jack has actually spoken on in the interviews I saw, where his opinion on the pop landscape is that artists are treated really badly and they're put into this state of mind where they're expected to be grateful for everything they have and to never ask for anything else. And so that is used by labels and execs to, I guess, limit the agency of artists and limit what they're able to do because, well, actually, you're really lucky that we're even giving you a chance in the first place. So that's something that Jack has spoken about very, very, a lot of times in terms of this toxic aspect of the industry and the way that it uses people. And so I like the way that he's infused that into this song. And you don't have to know that subtext to enjoy the song, but it enriches it, I think. It sucks that Big Life comes right after it. It sounds really bad. I think this is the one moment on the record where I'd agree that the mixing is a bit questionable. Again, he's a producer, so I'm sure it's intentional, but it just doesn't work. And it's also like to have a coda, a song that's like a coda instrumentally to the previous song. It's fine if you're making a fucking double album, right? If you're making an 80-minute album and you have a coda,
30-minute long,
and you have a coda like you have a song in the first half and then you have a coda in the second half that brings back the motif. It can be quite cool, right? A lot of albums that we like that are double albums do that, but it doesn't work on a 33-minute pop album, and it certainly doesn't work when it's right fucking next to the song it's codaing. So reprising rather. So yeah, it's anyway.
I mean, look, I haven't actually given my thoughts on the album yet.
Go for it.
Saoirse, noted Springsteen fan.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, I remember really distinctly sitting in my piano room, because every other room was filled. We had family over. On the episode where we reviewed the latest Protemaster album, calling Tunnel of Love my then favorite Springsteen record. Like,
Saoirse said, "Oh, I got a bad desire. I'm gonna give Born in the USA a 5." Or whatever you gave it.
A 4.
Not a rhyme button.
It was closer to a rhyme than 4.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I've since learned to appreciate Springsteen on albums like Darkness on the Edge of Town, stuff like that. But I'm not like a Springsteen super fan, and there are elements of the Springsteen pastiche on this album that just I appreciate on an intellectual level instead of like that postmodern frisson that it kind of wants. That being said, it's really fun, and I love the fact that Jack has chosen the name Bleachers for a solo project and then released this album, because it feels like these are songs that, like, in a teen movie would soundtrack like the hero nerd kissing the girl he's chasing under the bleachers, And it's, there are some moments on this record though that look, even if I don't love a Springsteen pastiche, it's 33 minutes long, and like almost every song has hooks for days and bangs, but then you get to the closer, What Did I Do With All This Faith, which has some incredible textural choices, in my opinion. There are some moments on that song where I'm like, you have gone outside of the wheelhouse of this record to bring in these really interesting choices to lend it this incredibly unique, nostalgic, like fuzzy VHS texture that I respect immensely. And it's on the same record with, like, look, I'm a sucker for a sax solo. I said this before. Any sax solo will make me like you more. I'm sorry. But then it's like that is on the same record as that song. And it's like, you have been a perfectly adequate record, but now you are pulling on my heartstrings, and I have nothing but respect for that.
I have nothing but respect for your adequacy.
My favorite Sparks album title: Gratuitous Sex and Senseless Violins.
Least favorite tracks.
These are a few of my favorite things.
3 favorite tracks and least favorite track. I'll go first this time. My 3 favorite tracks on the album are what's the one called? Chinatown. That's it.
Never allowed to make fun of me for not remembering an album name ever again.
He literally forgot it, Jake.
Yeah, Jack, exactly.
What's
now you can't either.
How do you want more?
Jake is a character, but it's Jack Nicholson.
And Stop Making This Hurt. My least favorite track on the record is Big Life. Big fucking whoop. And the album gets a 7 out of 10 from me.
I can't believe I laughed at that.
I can.
So my favorite tracks are How Dare You Want More, the fucking Lana Del Rey feature, As Much As It Pains Me, Secret Life.
She's got some good songs.
What did I do?
It's better than anything she's done recently.
That's true. And What Did I Do With All This Faith? My least favorite track is I don't know, they're all fine in my opinion, the ones that I don't love. And I'm giving this probably like a 7. Yeah.
I swear to God, if this gets a higher average than Happier Than Ever, I'm going to jump out my window.
August, you might want to give this like a 3 or something in this case.
Oh, damn.
You know. Yeah, my 3 favorites are Stop Making This Hurt, Chinatown, and 45, all of which I love a lot. Least favorite, probably Secret Life. And I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10.
All right, my 3 favorites here are 91, Chinatown, and What Did I Do With All of This Faith? That last one, if only because I couldn't stop thinking of the image of a pink guy holding the chromosomes and saying, what do I do with all these chromosomes? And it was the funniest mental image to me ever while listening to that song.
August, when you said the name of that song, I thought of you saying, what have I done here? In a Jason Isbell review.
And then fucking Morgan being like, yeah, because Jason Isbell still doesn't get any better.
Yeah, that's funny. Good shit.
Still
good shit.
Funny.
Least favorite, one of the Life songs, one of those 2. They're not good.
The Life duology.
The Life duology.
Pro-life.
Yeah.
John Carpenter's Pro-Life is my least favorite track on this album.
All right.
It's very bad.
5 out of 10.
Cinco.
6.
Maya.
5.
Love how someone went for Sace and someone went Mayo. Fucking... That's a meme somewhere. All right. Fucking... There are songs here.
Jack Antonoff, your time to rate the album.
Favorite song is Chinatown. Second favorite song is Stop Making This Hurt. Third favorite song is 45. Least favorite song is Strange Behavior. 6.
Wait. So you'll like this lower average than Happier Than Ever, 6.3.
6.3. Saoirse, pray tell, what else has gotten a 6.3?
Oh, I would love to tell you, Taylor Swift's Evermore.
Holy fucking shit!
Fantastic.
Jack Antonoff, greatest hits.
Kind of announced Disco, Lulu, and Shira's.
It will simply never not be funny when someone gets the 6.3 and we get to say it is rated the same as Lulu. There's just nothing that will not make that funny.
And on that note,
oh my God.
So let us know what you think of these albums in the comments below. As I said at the top of the episode, we love to hear from you all. So yeah, feedback is always appreciated. Stick around for our record club in 2 days' time for Mr. Bungle's California and our upcoming Radiohead episode on the King of Limbs, August. Why don't you tell the viewers at home what to do?
As always, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago, PlayStation, live in your world, play in ours.